Hey Donna, thanks. Wow, this has been an amazing event. So many great technical sessions from our MVPs and community members. I know I've learned a lot, so hopefully everyone else has as well. So I'm super happy to join two special friends with me to close out this event and expand on what we learned today. So let's welcome Amanda Silver and Charles Lamanna. Hey, you two, how are you doing?
Great, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining. Yeah, thank you for joining us. So I thought I would just kind of set the stage here, kick this off, and I'd like to kind of bring it around to what we talked about earlier today a little bit with Scott and the concept of fusion teams. So we heard a lot, so far about custom connectors and controls and ALM and so many great talks today. So I wanted to circle back on fusion teams and talk about and get your impact and your insight here on what these fusion teams are, why they're important, and why code-first developers should start embracing fusion development.
Well, I mean, I think of everything in the context of the developer shortage. Globally, we actually don't have enough developers to meet the demand of all the digital solutions that are being asked of us. And so I think as a result, it means that basically certain apps aren't getting created and organizations aren't operating as efficiently as they possibly could. And that means that basically we're not achieving everything that we could possibly achieve. And so from my perspective, I come from the professional developer world. I've been working on tools for professional developers for decades at this point. I always am looking at kind of what's being asked of developers. And what I've seen consistently for the last 20 years is that they're always overtaxed. They always have more that's being asked of them than what they're capable of doing. They're always working with a finite team that has limited capacity and resources, but there's always more than enough opportunity. And I think over the last couple of years, we've seen an absolute surge in demand for digital solutions. And so when I think about a fusion team, I think that it's basically a pro dev team empowering a set of people who are not professional developers to create digital solutions.
And what's really amazing about technology over the last few decades is that it's always being brought to more and more users over time, getting further democratized with a PC on every desk and a phone in every pocket. And what's interesting is that it's historically always been about the consumption and use of software by everybody. But what's amazing with tools like the Power Platform and low-code development, we're making it possible for everybody in the world to participate and contribute to the development of new solutions. And that's really what we find so exciting about the emergence of these low-code tools and technologies, is that you can have this broad base of users who used to only be focused on the consumption of software, give back and create and develop. And if you go look at the enterprise, we're seeing the emergence of the fusion teams as part of that. We're seeing professional developers and coders use things like IDEs and the standard development environments to go build components and building blocks which show up for all of those low-code developers out there inside of a highly immersive, visual, connected, and integrated experience. And this interplay back and forth between the low-code developers and the pro-code developers is what fusion teams are all about. And this type of enablement and this type of creativity is the only way we can address that app gap that Amanda was talking about earlier. It's really the only way we can go build the 500 million new apps that we need for every company in every industry around the globe over the next couple of years. And if we kind of go look where this really is going in the future, what's exciting is that we're going to see all these pro dev tools start to show up inside and integrated with these low code offerings and capabilities too. And with that, I kind of have a question for Amanda, which would be what type of tools and capabilities and environments are you really seeing the fusion teams pick up and adopt when it comes to these types of low code environments?
Well, I think one of the things that we're definitely seeing in terms of how fusion teams are empowering each other is that there's a little bit of a standard pattern that's emerging, and it really centers on APIs. When we think about web APIs, that really is the way that you can kind of create a small morsel of functionality for your application and then expose it for other developers to be able to use, whether they're professional developers or they're, developers who have maybe not that might not be their title, developer. They might be business analyst or something like that, but they're creating solutions for their end users. API is the common language. And so what we're seeing is that they're starting to basically build APIs, often by virtue of kind of creating what we would call microservices, but basically a little bit of functionality that they might implement using something like Azure Functions or Azure App Service. And then they expose it as a web API that professional developers or citizen developers might be able to consume. And they can actually control access to that API using something like Azure API Management, so that they can control, who's able to call it, how many times. They can have, throttling and things like that, as well as like RBAC controls, so that they can limit who actually has access to be able to call that API. So you still get all of the security that you would, expect of a professional developer to create, but you're empowering these non-professional developers or people who might not have developer in their job title to create solutions for their end users. And what I really love about all of this is that it's basically empowering people who are closer to the business, closer to the usage of the solution that's getting built, to be empowered to create these kinds of solutions. So Charles, that actually brings me to you. Like, what's your favorite example of somebody, of a Fusion team actually creating this kind of application?
Yes, so I'd say I have lots of favorites. So there's definitely a Hall of Fame somewhere in my house of all the amazing Fusion team stories. But one of the ones that I just heard a couple of weeks ago was from Robobank. And they're a Dutch financial organization, which is really exciting in terms of supporting sustainability initiatives as well as agriculture. So a lot of, I'd say, good mission as part of being a bank over time as well. And we met with them and they actually walked us through how they really embrace this idea of Fusion teams inside the bank. And what's great is that they have professional developers and IT pros who build those common APIs, those common components that you were talking about earlier, Amanda, which are then being picked up and leveraged by all the low-code developers across the entire bank. And these are business users, people in finance, people in accounting or compliance. They're the ones building the solutions, leveraging all these great little microservices and little bits and pieces that really unlock super powerful and compelling experiences inside of the Power Platform and inside of low-code tools. And what I really found super interesting was two things about the approach that they took. The first is that they built application lifecycle management, or ALM, into their approach from day one. So not only did they have these little bits and pieces that people could use, but they also had an amazing story for how you could build a solution inside of pre-production, go through QA, and then ultimately publish it to production. And even how you could go support it and report tickets and issues over time. And this kind of full lifecycle approach to manage these applications is a great way to really unlock the potential of all the business users out there through the pro dev expertise and pro dev capabilities that you have. Because things like a software development lifecycle or ALM aren't super common. You don't run into that when you build an Excel document or a PowerPoint presentation. So finding the right way to introduce these concepts to those end users is super critical for a broad-based, very successful deployment. So that was item number one.
Well, let me just touch on that point for a second, because I love that aspect of the Power Platform. As a professional developer, I think there's so many times that we've heard stories of people building an Excel application. Essentially, they had a spreadsheet and it kind of got out of control because it basically became the spreadsheet that the business operated on, and it started getting shared to hundreds of people within the organization. And by the time they realized that it was actually a business critical application, it got moved to central IT. Central IT is looking at it and like, what do I do with this? I don't necessarily know, everybody who's using it. I don't know how to update it. I don't know how to basically get it out there. And what I love about, the Power Platform and the approach that we're taking here is that you can do things like application lifecycle management from the beginning. You can empower these folks to create these applications that maybe central IT doesn't necessarily know about the instant it's created, but it's created in such a way that you can actually manage policy around, what does that lifecycle management actually look like? And as the application gets used more and more in the organization, and it has to scale to the demand of the way that the organization is using it, it can actually become integrated and managed through central IT as well.
Yeah. And whenever we go talk to customers who've been on a low code journey, maybe for 20 years or so with a different technology in the past, pre-cloud, pre-mobile, this is a thing that always comes up, which is how do you go, if you are successful with low code development, what then? How do you go support it and manage it over time? So having this upfront and having it actually done by developers who understand SDLC just makes companies like Robobank super successful with this Fusion team idea. And the second one is a great component as well, the same idea that Amanda was talking about, which is this idea of DevSecOps, and basically how do you go inject security and compliance and all those checks as part of that application lifecycle management process. As folks that work in regulated industries like financial services or healthcare or public sector and government know, there's a lot of requirements around how you can manage and leverage data. But what's great is that by actually embracing the standard rollout process to go from pre-production to production, Robobank and its developers and IT professionals were able to ensure that the right security checks were in place. And that is just as important in this day and age as whether or not an app works, is also whether or not that app is secure. And that's kind of been a journey that we've been really focused on at Microsoft, is not only making it super easy to build out these solutions, but make it easy to secure them and manage and operate them. So just a great example of kind of that interplay between business users and coders and IT professionals, really as the three legs of the stool, which prop up this idea of building the next wave and the next huge number of digital solutions that every company needs to be successful moving forward. And I'm sure, Amanda, you have your own favorite story that you can share. So I'd love to hear that as well.
Well, I think the one that comes to mind for me most recently is the Western States Caterpillar organization, which actually it's not a huge organization. It's about 900 employees, and what they do is they manage Caterpillar, utility tractors and things like that are used in construction in Wyoming and Montana and Idaho. And they basically kind of operate like a rental service for these machines, along with like servicing and parts and other things like that. And so they kind of have a business managing all of these machines for everybody. And they had an IT department, but they still had all this friction in terms of the operations of what it actually looked like to service and to return and to rent all of these different tractors and other utilities. So they were really focused on the points of friction in the operations of their organization. And one of the big pieces of feedback that they got from their team was that the process of returning a vehicle back to their depot was really onerous. And so they worked on something called the Return to Ready application, which basically takes a vehicle as it's coming back, and it allows the service person to be able to put in all of the details around mileage and any damage and pictures and other things like that. And they implemented it using a low-code mobile application with the Power Apps tool. And it also created additional events and timestamps that they weren't getting from other solutions. But what I really love about this story is that, first of all, it was done initially from the strategy and BI team, which actually sits much more close to the executive team of the organization. And that team actually worked on basically what do they need to build for their organization? And the way that they did it I just love this story because of the customer empathy. What they did is they actually brought in the folks who would be using the application into their store, and they listened to them, and they actually co-created the application with the end users in the store as they were doing development of the application. And they also went on ride-alongs with the folks who are driving the trucks that move a lot of these vehicles to the sites and locations that they need to go, because they're also going to end up being users of these applications. And so what I love about this is that, the potential of this low-code solution to empower folks to actually go and connect with their end users and to create solutions that are more powerful, that are actually more effective in terms of what the organization needs. Now, the next part is that they do have a central IT team, even though their organization is only about 900 people. And the central IT team uses tools like Visual Studio to create those APIs that the strategy and BI team uses to create these mobile applications. And so it's really this central IT organization collaborating very closely with the strategy and BI team that's focused on operations and kind of, output and outcomes for the organization. So I just love that story, mainly because of the fact that the low-code tools empowered this organization to achieve efficiencies, but also through customer empathy.
And I think that's what's so exciting about bringing those business users into the fold to actually participate and contribute to the solutions is who better to actually tell you what they need for a digital solution than the people that would use it every day for the next 5 years. So, and that type of kind of interplay is what makes it so exciting to have the Fusion team, not just from a technical efficiency perspective, but like you said, Amanda, customer empathy, really understanding the business process you want to improve with technology, have the people who actually would use that technology. So, right. So all super exciting.
Right.
And another thing I'd want to say, which I really liked about that one, is how there is a role for so many different parts of the company. Because what's really important is low code doesn't mean that developers go away. Mm-hmm. It just means there's a different way for some solutions to be built. And the low-code developer in the business and the pro coder in IT and the BI specialist, all three of them are actually more productive, more effective, more employable, and even more in demand than ever before because of this concept of the Fusion team. So that type of ability to go create more responsibility and more opportunity is just what technology's been doing forever. Kind of that's the theme of everything I've been saying today is it's been 40 years of more apps, more automation, more workflow, more BI, more chat experience. The same thing is happening, just starting to reach out into those business users at the same time.
Yeah. And I think, that's a great story of kind of achieving efficiencies inside the operations of an organization. But I also love the story from Ikea, which actually allowed them to capture net new business through low-code solutions. In this example, they basically had exactly the story what we were talking about earlier, where they had an Excel spreadsheet that had gotten out of control in terms of, it was an Excel spreadsheet that had been standardized for the organization to do, custom kitchen plan outs. And I don't know if have you ever remodeled your kitchen, Charles?
I have not, but I have a lot of Ikea in my house.
I have remodeled my kitchen, and it is quite an arduous process. And I can definitely understand if that's kind of your regular day job. That has to be an absolutely complex nightmare to manage. And, I think what's cool about that example is they really saw an opportunity to get into more of the business of managing custom kitchen build-outs with IKEA solutions. But their Excel spreadsheets didn't deliver consistent communication with their customers. There was no mobility. So when they were out in the field on visits or they were even in the stores, they didn't have access to all of the information that they needed to kind of make the sale. They had no role-based security. And so everybody had the same access to the spreadsheets. And there was just lots of complex information that they needed to manage. These kitchen build-outs can take months to complete. And there's so many different, parts for the kitchen that you need to be able to create. But in this case, this allowed their sales team to actually create more of a human-to-human connection. And as a result, they were having a conversation about what the customer was really excited about, which is their future kitchen, as opposed to having to fight with technology to be able to have that conversation. And the other thing that I love about this is that, they heavily used Azure to actually accelerate the solution as well. So they used Azure Logic Apps to actually create a summary of the customer meeting after the fact, so they could send it in an email to the customer with quotes and other things that actually made more of a connection with the customer. They used Azure Functions to do things like scheduling. There might be times that the business is closed for the weekend or there's a local holiday or other things like that. Azure Functions is a perfect example of something that you can use for those kinds of jobs that can be scheduled, that's appropriate with your particular business. They used Azure Blob Storage to actually persist all of the data. And that also helped them secure the data. So really the apps had the access to be able to access the data. And you had to be able to access the data, you had to use these apps so that no single person could actually access any customer data. So it had validated security roles in all of that. And then everything was stored in Azure Key Vault. All of the credentials, all of the access keys, everything related to security is all stored in Azure Key Vault. But all of this was exposed through, APIs that are then they can then use in the Power Apps that they then created these mobile applications that really allowed their sales team in the kitchens department to actually create, the kitchen of your dreams.
That's super awesome. And I like within the Power Platform team, we have a mantra we always talk about, which is this idea of no cliffs with low code development, which is you're never going to run off a cliff when you want some more complexity. And, there's a famous saying from Apple of there's an app for that on the phone. It's kind of like whenever you hit like an edge or a cliff inside of the Power Platform, there's an Azure service for that. You want to write some code, Azure Functions. You want to call an API, Azure API Management. You want events, Azure Event Hub. There's hundreds of amazing capabilities that you can always drop into from the Power Platform into Azure, and you're never going to run out of gas when you're trying to build out these solutions. And that IKEA example is super cool in terms of just pulling all the different pieces together to go build such a transformative application experience, but without being stuck or dogmatic about one piece of technology. It's not low code or pro code, it's both. That's kind of the big thing we keep talking about. So very, very exciting to hear that.
So how do you think people are going to create apps, in the future? Like, what do you think is the what do you see for the next couple of years of app creation?
So I'm obviously going to be biased by that, but I'd say I think you're going to see more and more low code development, and like what low code means is going to change. Like today, low code means very narrowly like a drag and drop visual experience to build apps, to build bots, to build chat experience or BI dashboards and reports. That's kind of what low code means. But what's amazing is it's going to stretch to be more about composition and leveraging higher order building blocks. And I expect that we'll start to see the emergence of all kinds of like all-in-one services and capabilities to do things like commerce or like a retail footprint, like what you see with some of the e-commerce solutions out there. Or you're going to start to see it for things like payments, like what Stripe has done, which is pretty remarkable, or Twilio does. You're just going to see this prevalence of higher order services, APIs, and capabilities, which will be assembled by low-code developers and pro-code developers to quickly build these amazing solutions as fast as possible. And the same force that Amanda started the chat with, the same idea of just unparalleled and unprecedented demand for digital solutions and developers is going to drive this as well. Because instead of having every company rebuild, how do I compute tax code? How do I do scheduling of physical assets? How do I interpret IoT signals? You're just going to go look for something off the shelf, which you can compose with code and with low code and with no code to get the job done as fast as possible. So kind of, it's never been a better time to be a developer in terms of jobs, opportunities, and career, but also it's never been a better time to be a developer in terms of the amazing collection of things you can leverage to get your job done faster. You've come a long way from assembly or even programming languages. We're in this new era of API catalogs and AI catalogs and PaaS services and SaaS services. I think that's really going to be the defining trait for development over the next few years. And I think everybody's going to benefit, anybody that's involved in the developer economy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, I have to flip that around and say, Amanda, what do you think? Yeah,
I totally agree with you. I mean, I think the trends that you're describing, we also see in the pro developer world, around there being SaaS services, SaaS APIs that complete a particular function. You talked about tax codes as an example. That there's so many instances where developers are great general purpose jack of all trades capable and lifelong learners. that's one of the reasons why I love working for developers, is because, they're always excited about learning a new technology. But learning a tax code for a certain, region of the world, that's something that, I think they don't really love doing. And so if there's an API that can be abstracted to allow them to build that into the functionality of their application without them having to get into the current tax code and managing that, of course they're going to use it. All developers are really resourceful. They basically know when they're writing code that only they can write, that's the code that's unique to them and to their organization, and what's the code that is boilerplate and probably better implemented by somebody who's an expert in that domain. And so I think a lot of what you're talking about in terms of ready-made APIs that developers can use is something that we're going to see in pure pro dev solutions. But it's also something that will empower low-code tools as well. Because many of these applications rely on those kinds of things, whether it's something that does scheduling, something that deals with tax codes, something that deals with holidays, or various different domains. I think that's an example of something that a low-code developer, app creator can use to make their app better more quickly.
Absolutely. Like there's an API for that. That's going to be the mantra of the future.
Exactly.
And when we talk about low code, we say the emergence of SaaS and the API economy is what transformed the low code market over the last 5 years, because every little solution you build, whether it's in BI or workflows, like with Power Automate or Power BI or Power Apps, it can connect to all your existing data. That wasn't as possible 10 years ago. And it all starts from API. So amazing times.
Yeah. And I think there's an aspect of that in terms of the platform that we're building. All of the connectors that are available to you. Not only can you connect to the various different Microsoft or Azure services or Power App services, Power Platform services, you can also connect to external APIs like from Stripe or from SAP or other organizations that are providing solutions for you.
Awesome.
Well, awesome. I think April. Yeah, sorry. So yeah. April's given us the. We're going over time.
Yeah. No. This is. I could talk all day about this stuff and listen to you both talk about it. It's been really great to hear your insights on Fusion development and the future of development. It's definitely an exciting time to be a developer for sure. I do have one more final question for the both of you though before we call it quits here. So when we're talking about people here that want to get started, so first of all, what are some, as Donna would like to say, some homework that you want to leave everyone, or some calls to action for those itching to get started with building on top of the Power Platform?
Well, I think, one of the first places that I recommend everybody get started is just looking for the Power Apps developer plan. It's something that we came out with pretty recently, and it allows you to create flows and apps, and actually share them with others. And it basically works for anything that's kind of pre-production. And you can also connect to data sources, whether that's in Azure or it's in Dynamics 365 or custom APIs or like the 400 premium connectors that we were talking about earlier. And, you can also create environments that allow you to kind of stage developer, dev, test and production. And as we were talking about earlier, you can manage the entire application lifecycle with this as well. So you can have continuous integration, continuous deployment. And what's also super cool is that you can also connect to the Dataverse. And so that means that you can use all of the, custom data schemas, all of the business, the common, types that people have in various different types of business applications. You can actually access those without having to write a bunch of new data schema for your application.
Yeah, Dataverse. No, and I think the only thing I would add on top of that is just get started. If you haven't used the Power Platform or haven't used some of the pro code extensibility, just get started and give it a try. You can get started with everything for free. If you've used Power Apps and Visual Studio, try out Power BI, maybe play with Azure Synapse. Go try out some new services across that spectrum, because the future of solutions is going to use it all. It's going to use a bunch of different Azure services and a bunch of different Power Platform services. And if you hear that and say, oh, well, I've already used all of it, well, then reach out to us. We have a bunch of cool private previews, which will gladly loop you in, but you have to first use everything in the Power Platform and as much as you can in Azure as well. So.
Yes, and piggyback on that, definitely check out the developer plans. You can get started building solutions, just seeing what's possible. We have great learning paths for Fusion development that you can check out as well. So be sure to give that a look. And I want to end with thanking you both, Amanda and Charles. This has been so much fun, a great event here. I've learned a ton. It's been great listening to you talk. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. All right. Well, back to you, Donna and Greg.